Coming up on Arirang News. Putting the spotlight on some of the world's best young athletes, the closing ceremony from the first ever digital Olympic cauldron to the parade of flags marks an end to the 14-day journey in Gangwon 2024, the Winter Youth Olympics. Stressing that now is the golden time for medical reform in South Korea, President Yoon says it's vital to raise the number of medical personnel. The reform also includes providing quality health care, even in remote areas, and reducing legal risks involved with medical accidents. South Korea's exports are off to a good start this year, seeing an almost 20% year-on-year jump in January on the back of increased shipments to China and semiconductors. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. It's time to say farewell to hundreds of the world's best young athletes gathered in Gangwon province here in South Korea. Gangwon 2024, the very first Winter Youth Olympic Games held in Asia, came to a close less than an hour ago, before which Team Korea ended its run with a golden finale. Our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin starts us off from Gangneung.
Goodbye, Gangwon 2024. The Gangwon 2024 Winter Youth Olympic Games came to a close on Thursday night. Though heavy snow warnings were issued in most parts of Gangwon province, the weather did little to dampen the festivities.
This is our sixth day here. We watched figure skating and took a look around the festival booths, like K-food tryouts and photo booths. I hope Korea hosts more international sports events like this in the future.
I hope the athletes enjoy this beautiful snowy day as they've just finished competing.
The closing ceremony started with a pre-show at the plaza outside the Gangneung Hockey Center. Unlike the opening ceremony, the event was open to everyone, so no need to buy a ticket. The 35-minute official ceremony began at 8 p.m. It featured a screening of highlights from the games, the parade of the flags, and the extinguishing of the first-ever digital Olympic cauldron. Around 1,700 people attended the event, including International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach, Gangwon 2024 Organizing Committee Chairman Choi Jong-gu, athletes, volunteers, and spectators. Team Korea also had its grand finale on Thursday, ending its Olympic run the same way it started, with gold. Gold medals were added in the figure skating team event and men's snowboard halfpipe. With this, Korea has won a total of 7 gold, 6 silver, and 4 bronze. So throughout the games, we witnessed remarkable performances from 1,800 athletes representing 70 national Olympic committees across 15 disciplines in 7 sports. Now, with the closing ceremony, Gangwon 2024 has ended its 14-day journey. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News, Gangneung.
Moving on to the medical reform plans here in the country. Stressing that now is the golden time for medical reform, President Yoon says it's vital to raise the number of medical personnel. The reform also includes providing quality health care even in remote areas and reducing legal risks involved with medical accidents. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
In 10 years, the government says that South Korea could be short of 15,000 doctors. And to tackle this, President Yoon Suk-yeol on Thursday confirmed that he will raise the medical school enrollment quota. While no specific number has been announced, this is something past presidencies failed to do so because of strong opposition from doctors, keeping the number at 3,058 for the past 16 years. President Yoon said it's one of the last chances to save the country's medical system as a whole as he laid out his medical reform package on Thursday during the 8th livelihood policy discussion with citizens.
지금이 의료 개혁을 추진해 나갈 골든 타임입니다. 대다수 국민이 원하는 의료 개혁을 일부의 반대나 저항 때문에 후퇴한다면 국가의 본질적인 역할을 저버리는 것이나 다름없습니다.
Other areas for reform are strengthening access to quality healthcare for residents in rural areas, fixing the current malpractice laws, and adjusting compensation so essential and high-risk doctors are paid more fairly. For the issue of rural areas lacking in healthcare, President Yoon said it's key to balance regional growth and said it will attract doctors to work in rural areas with local advantages and better pay. In terms of malpractice laws, he says the current system limits doctors from practicing medicine solely based on their conscience.
의사는 경찰 조사로 어려움을 겪고 정작 피해자는 제대로 보상도 못 받는 이러한 모순된 일이 반복되고 있습니다.
At the discussion, patients, doctors, and first responders also chimed in with their experiences. One of the issues that caught people's attention was the lack of availability in emergency rooms, especially in rural areas, making an ambulance drive 100 kilometers with a patient in critical condition. Regarding this, President Yoon announced that more than $7.5 billion will be injected to address essential areas like this. Wrapping up the discussion, President Yoon also brought up the medical industry as a source to drive the economy.
우리 의료인들도 많은 의과학자와 또 의료 관련 사업가를 양산을 시켜야 되고 그렇게 해서 임상과 또 의과학과 또 관련 이런 산업이 균형 있게 발전해 나갈 수 있도록 해야 된다고 봅니다.
He showed his confidence that South Korea's level of expertise in both medicine and technology can make the country an industry leader. 김도현, Arirang News.
The South Korean government has decided to establish a cybersecurity commission under the National Security Office as part of efforts to significantly strengthen its capabilities of proactively identifying and eliminating cyber threats from North Korea. The Yoon administration unveiled a plan on Thursday, setting the country's vision of being a global pivotal state that upholds values of freedom, human rights, and the rule of law in cyberspace. The National Security Office stresses that simply enhancing defensive capabilities is not enough to effectively address North Korea's illicit cyber activities. It said it'll proactively respond to cyber threats that provoke societal or economic turmoil and detect the origins of attacks before engaging in aggressive cyber defense. Now to the latest move by the U.S. Central Bank. The Federal Reserve continues to keep its interest rate steady at a 23-year high. There's been much anticipation for a rate cut, possibly next month, but Chairman Jerome Powell signaled something different. Our Shin Ha-young explains.
After the U.S. Federal Reserve's first two-day meeting of this year, the FOMC on Wednesday announced a fourth consecutive rate freeze. With this latest decision, the benchmark interest rates in the U.S. remain in the 5.25% to 5.5% range. Since before the meeting, the market's focus has been on the timing of rate cuts from the Fed. There have been rising expectations of a March rate cut after the Fed last month hinted at 3 possible rate cuts in 2024. However, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell expressed doubts about a cut next month, saying it's less likely that the committee will reach a level of confidence about inflation, which would allow rates to be cut by the time of the March meeting.
It's not that the 6-month data isn't low enough. It is. It's just a question of can we take that with confidence that we're moving sustainably under 2%.
The Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, which excludes food and energy, for last month rose 2.9% from the year before. This is the first time it has dropped to a 2% level since March 2021. The Fed chairman also said there is more concern about the risk of inflation staying above 2% than there is for major inflation spikes. One expert says it's because of the sacrifice needed to achieve the Fed's inflation target.
Chairman Powell has always said that their goal is 2% inflation, not inflation around 2%, but 2% on the dot. So there has been a lot of concern that getting from 3% to 2% will be very, very difficult, and it will involve a lot of sacrifice.
Meanwhile, the latest Fed rate freeze means the key interest rate gap between South Korea and the U.S. remains at 2 percentage points.
BOK will have to delay the rate cuts if they were planning to cut the rates during the first half of the year. But the good thing is that Chairman Powell is giving solid signals that he will lower the rates sometime this year unless inflation goes back up.
During Thursday's emergency macroeconomic meeting in South Korea, Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok said that there is growing uncertainty about the timing of rate cuts in other countries, adding that the government will remain vigilant regarding the situation. 신하영, Arirang News.
On the local front, South Korea's exports are off to a good start this year, seeing an almost 20% year-on-year jump in January on the back of increased shipments to China and semiconductors. Our An Sung-jin takes a closer look.
The month of January provided positive signs for South Korea's exports. Data from the Trade Ministry on Thursday showed that exports saw an on-year increase of 18%. Reaching $54.69 billion. As imports dropped by 7.8%, the trade balance maintained its surplus of $300 million. It's the first time in 20 months that on-year exports growth reached a two-digit figure. Most export products saw a rise, including displays, home appliances, ships, and mechanical products. However, the sharp increase was mostly geared by a strong performance in the semiconductor industry, which was at its highest value since December 2017. Chip exports increased by 56.2% on-year as demand increased for high-value-added memory chips. On the back of a strong semiconductor industry, exports to China saw a rebound. The on-year increase rate was positive for the first time in 20 months.
40% of exports to China are IT products, which is currently in its low season. Once it peaks in the second or third quarter, exports are only going to increase even more.
A recovery in demand for TVs and LCD shipments also contributed. Exports to the U.S. were strong too, seeing an on-year increase of 26.9%. The Trade Ministry stated that these figures are a good start toward achieving record-high exports for this year, which follows Trade Minister An Dok-kun at the 2024 World Trade Strategy meeting last week, pledging to come up with strategies to respond to the changing global market based on digital transformation, population change, carbon neutrality, and supply chain reconstructions. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Staying with trade, annual sales of eco-friendly cars in Korea surpassed 550,000 units for the first time last year. Seoul's Transport Ministry says this is a jump of nearly 25% on year, and the majority of these cars were hybrid and over 70% were Korean-made models. The ministry's findings also show sales of the so-called green cars have surged by over 100,000 units each year from 2021. Online spending in Korea hit an all-time high in 2023, mainly due to more people arranging and booking travel. According to Statistics Korea on Thursday, the value of online transactions last year exceeded 220 trillion won, or some $170 billion, the highest figure ever. That's an increase of over 8% year-on-year. Spending on travel and transportation jumped around 45% as COVID-19 pandemic worries eased. South Korea has been battling high inflation for a while now. Our economic correspondent Lee Soo-jin tells us how people here are coping with the high costs.
People in South Korea continue to grapple with high costs as inflation remains stubbornly high. Where does this leave people? They have to look for ways to spend less, such as when they're eating out. This is a noodle restaurant located in an alleyway. A bowl of noodles here is only 4,500 won, or around $3. This is especially impressive considering how the cost of eating out has jumped more than 6% for 2 straight years, the highest level seen in 30 years. The owner says she was able to keep prices low thanks to the support she gets from her regular customers.
There are even people that come every day, and it makes me happy to see familiar faces. I'm very grateful for them.
The restaurant has been designated as a fair price business, an honor that the Interior Ministry and local governments give to businesses that meet certain price and sanitation standards.
I come at least twice a week because it's a lot cheaper than other restaurants, but still good.
Businesses that receive this designation are provided with free essential items such as trash bags and even have cheaper utility bills. And starting February this year, the Interior Ministry is expanding benefits as it signed an agreement last Thursday with local credit card companies to provide 2,000 won discounts each time a customer spends more than 10,000 won at these businesses. Another area where people have to deal with high prices is when they do their grocery shopping. You can also see how more people than ever are doing their grocery shopping at places where they don't have to deal with high food prices, like this wholesale market. The price of strawberries, for instance, which jumped more than 150% in December, are only around 5,000 won here.
I come here more often than large supermarkets these days because you can get fresh products for cheaper.
People are also going to unmanned stores that sell eggs for cheaper as they can save on labor costs. Eggs here are priced as low as around 5,000 won for a carton of 15 eggs, which are more than 8,000 won at some large supermarkets. Even though we visited the store late in the morning, a lot of the eggs were already sold. With the Bank of Korea forecasting annual inflation to stabilize slowly, people are likely to continue turning to these affordable options. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Seoul's symbolic mascot has given a makeover for the first time since it was introduced back in 2008. The new look was revealed on Thursday in the city's Dongdaemun Design Plaza amid hopes to promote the symbol called Haechi and for it to regain its former popularity. Based on a mythical creature that served as a protector of the city, Haechi is now in pink and blue instead of its former yellow and orange hue. With the transformation complete, it'll be featured in the city's upcoming festivals such as the Seoul Festa. Over in Brussels, the EU member states are pushing for more funding for Ukraine against the Russian invasion, trying to bring Hungary on board for that. Our Yoon tells us more.
On Thursday, leaders of the 27 member states of the European Union will meet in Brussels for a discussion on bringing Hungary on board to unlock around $54 billion of funding for Ukraine. The EU is pushing for a more stable financing plan for Ukraine through to 2027, moving away from the complex, costly, and less predictable financing system that has been used. The EU has been helping Ukraine since Moscow invaded in 2022, but so far it has been through intergovernmental deals that require national approvals every year and are more costly and complex than funding through the EU budget. Using an EU budget calls for a unanimous vote from the 27 member states, but due to close ties with Moscow, Hungary has continued to delay agreements within the EU bloc. Hungary wants support to be reviewed annually, which EU officials say will allow Budapest to veto each time. This has kept the other 26 EU countries and Hungary in a standoff since December, with leaders gathering in the hope of finding a resolution. This summit may be the last opportunity to unlock funding for Ukraine, which is expected to run out of cash to run normal state functions in March. Ahead of the EU summit, farmers across the EU blocked traffic arteries across Belgium, France, and Italy on Wednesday with their tractors as they seek better prices for their produce and less bureaucracy in their work. The protests had an immediate impact. The European Commission announced plans to shield farmers from cheap exports from Ukraine during wartime and allow farmers to use some land that had been forced to lie fallow for environmental reasons. Meanwhile, on Wednesday, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that Ukraine had used a U.S.-supplied Patriot air defense system to shoot down a Russian military transport plane last week, saying that it killed all 74 people on board and demanded an international investigation into the incident. Ukraine has neither confirmed nor denied that it downed the plane and has demanded proof of who was on board. Yoon, Arirang News.
On the international front, the fate of the UN agency aiding Palestinian refugees but accused of aiding Hamas hangs in limbo as Israel calls for its closure while the UN asks for continued assistance. Our Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Wednesday called for the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency to be shut down, saying that a number of its officials were involved in the October 7th attacks.
And I think it's time that the international community and the UN itself understand that UNRWA's mission has to end.
However, the Israeli Prime Minister called for other UN agencies and other aid agencies to replace UNRWA in order to solve problems in Gaza properly. Despite reports of UN Palestinian Refugee Agency's officials taking part in the October 7th attacks, UN Chief Antonio Guterres called on countries to continue to contribute to the agency, calling it the backbone of the humanitarian response in Gaza. Guterres stressed the inhumane conditions faced by Gaza's 2.2 million people. The comments come as a number of donor countries, including the agency's biggest donor, the United States, halted their contributions. Meanwhile, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and top Israeli official Ron Dermer held talks in Washington on Wednesday. The two discussed the flow of humanitarian aid to Gaza and the status of efforts to get hostages released. The meeting also comes as the U.S. has been working with Israel and Qatar to reach a deal for the release of hostages held by Hamas. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Today, February 1st, marks 3 years since the military coup in Myanmar, and South Korea joined other countries in strongly condemning the military regime's human rights violations. Foreign ministers of the countries that also included the U.S., members of the EU, and the U.K. and Canada issued a joint statement on Thursday calling on the United Nations and ASEAN countries to make efforts to resolve the situation. They noted that the military's actions have fueled a humanitarian crisis with 2.6 million people displaced from their homes and more than 18 million people in need of basic necessities. The ministers added that they continue to stand in solidarity with the Myanmar people and their desire for a genuine democracy.
With cloudy skies over the country, there was rain in the southern regions and snow on the east coast. Affected by the easterly winds, the snow will persist until tomorrow in eastern coastal areas. As lots of snow is predicted, a heavy snow warning is issued on the east coast. Up to 15 centimeters of snow is expected in Yeongdong, Gangwon province by tomorrow, and up to 10 in the east coast areas of Gyeongsangbuk-do province. Snow on the east coast will continue until tomorrow morning, and rain on Jeju Island will continue until the day after tomorrow. In particular, the snow is humid and heavy, so please take precautions against any safety accidents. Tomorrow's Seoul and Daejeon will start off at 0 degrees. Daily highs will be topping out at relatively milder temperatures in most areas. Seoul will get up to 6 degrees, Daejeon and Daegu 8 degrees Celsius. On Sunday and Monday, there is another round of rain or snow across the country. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that is all for this newscast tonight. Thank you for watching. We'll be back at 10 p.m. with the AI Headline News. Good night.